What is going on, everybody? It is the Icebreaker here, back with another video, and of course, back with some more hockey content for you guys. And as you can tell by the title of this video, this is going to be my Atlantic Division standings predictions in the NHL for the upcoming 2022-2023 season. So this is going to conclude the mini series that I had here of predicting these divisions and where every team stands. I did every other division in the NHL, the Metro, the Central, and the Pacific. If you haven't already seen those videos, go check them out. But to conclude, I got the Atlantic here today. A lot of moving parts in this division, so let's not waste any more time and let's get right into it. So kicking things off here, 8th and last in the Atlantic Division. This really shouldn't come as a huge surprise to anybody. I got the Montreal Canadiens with a 30-43-9 record for a total of 69 points. This is quite self-explanatory. The Montreal Canadiens are simply just not a good team. Clearly, they're building a new era here. They're rebuilding now, bringing in Kent Hughes and Jeff Gordon. They're going to take this team into a different direction. They're going to get a lot younger over the next couple of seasons. Obviously, last season, they were the worst team in the NHL, and they got the #1 overall pick as a result. And under Marty St. Louis, I think he is a pretty good coach for this team, and a lot of the guys kind of thrived a little bit offensively and improved their games in the second half of the season. So I do expect them to kind of be roughly on the same pace that Marty St. Louis had them on if they were still an under 500 team. But I still think they could hover in the 65, 70 point range. Definitely going to be a bottom 5 team in the NHL in all likelihood at the very best. They could be even lower. They could be in contention for a #1 overall pick once again, be like a bottom 2, bottom 3 team. But yeah, this Montreal Canadiens team, not very good. They're rebuilding, and I don't have as high expectations really entering this season compared to what I did last season, where they obviously disappointed me. Getting into the top 5 scorers, or who I'm predicting to be in the top 5 in scoring for this Montreal Canadiens team, I got a lot of guys kind of having sort of breakout seasons. Again, under Marty St. Louis, they were a much better offensive team, and I think they're going to, kind of instill more of a skilled lineup and be more of an offensively dominant team, not so much on the defensive end or in goal. But on offense, I think there's going to be a lot more scoring, and there's going to be a lot of guys who score a lot more points. So anyway, leading the team in scoring, obviously, you got to go with Nick Suzuki. He led the team in points last year with 61. I think he could elevate his game to another level. He is the #1 center on this team. I think he is capable of producing roughly 70 points, having another 20-plus goal season, and about 50 assists. So 71 points, I think he's going to get somewhere in that range. I just think he is an elite two-way centerman and is going to be a very good #1 centerman for a long time. I don't think he necessarily has an elite offensive upside like a point per game or anything like that. Well, maybe he can be an 80-point guy, 85-point guy in his prime. But I do think with Marty St. Louis, he's going to take a step forward, be roughly 70 points, as well as Cole Caulfield. We all know the second half of the season how absolutely dominant he was in terms of the goal scoring with Marty St. Louis as his head coach. He did absolutely nothing with Ducharme, but with Marty St. Louis, another guy, I think he's going to have a massive breakout season. I think he can push for 40 goals, honestly. Maybe he was, playing a little bit too high of a pace there. I don't know if, the goal per game pace he was on last season can be sustainable, but I just think he has the elite goal scoring upside. So I do think he's going to be hovering around 40 goals. So I have him with 37, 64 points. Suzuki Caulfield, that's the dynamic duo on the Montreal Canadiens, and those are going to be the guys that are going to be carrying this team offensively next year. And after that, it was kind of tough to predict because a lot of these players are kind of underachievers. I don't really know exactly where they fit in this lineup. It's going to be interesting to see how Marty St. Louis kind of juggle these lines with all these other, depth pieces. But in third, I could see Jonathan Drouin low-key having a bit of a good season if he is fully healthy. I don't even know if he's going to be starting this season, but I can see him playing at roughly half an assist per game pace. Could be roughly 15 goals. I think he could push 50 to 60 points. I think this could be actually his career high. I haven't projected there, but I just think under Marty St. Louis, he's 27 years old. I just think there's still some offense he can give. I think he's in the prime of his career. If he just comes back fully healthy, I do think he does have the opportunity to actually kind of, low-key pop off a little bit. So, maybe that's a bit of a hot take having him with, that many points. Maybe some guys would think he's only like 40, 45, but under Marty St. Louis, I think there is some opportunity there for him to be a lot more or show a lot more offense than what we have seen in previous seasons. And then Christian Dvorak, probably going to be playing with him He was playing at roughly a 20-goal pace, 50-point play pace as well. If he was fully healthy, he had 33 points in 56 games last year. So I think 50 points, 20 goals, not really a hot take there. I think that's pretty fair for him. And then in fifth, it was kind of tough because I don't really know, like, who are the bounce back candidates like Brendan Gallagher? Can he be better than what he was last season? Will Kirby Dach step up and break out? I'm not too sure. What is Sean Monahan's future like in the NHL? Can he return to being a, top six centerman, or is he just simply a shell of himself? And there's guys like Mike Hoffman. Like, what is he at this stage of his career? Can Josh Anderson ever, be more than just a 20, 25 goal, 40-point guy? I just went with Evgeny Dadonov. I just think he's going to have more of an opportunity to play in the top six. Specifically, I could see him playing in a top-line role with Nick Suzuki and Cole Caulfield, which is why I can see him having about 45 points. I just think they're going to try to, up his value basically throughout the season and probably flip him at the deadline since he is a pending UFA. So I could see him being a little bit more of a productive offensive piece on this team. But overall, the Montreal Canadiens are just a team that is establishing a core. And I am a Habs fan, so I'm trying to be as objective as possible here, though. I do kind of like where they are offensively. I do think, again, under Marty St. Louis, they have the opportunity to be a much more fun, entertaining team to watch on the offensive side of things. But I still think their blue line is among the worst in the NHL. And the goaltending, honestly, is no better. I mean, Samuel Montembeault is a fringe NHL caliber goalie. I mean, fringe backup, I guess. He had a really rough season. Maybe he could be a little bit better. As well as Jake Allen, he didn't have the greatest year either. I think he's probably more of a backup goaltender, but he can step in and be a decent starter. He has shown that he can be a reliable, serviceable 1B type of goaltender. But overall, this is not a very good team, and I don't expect them to contend for the next 3 to 5 years at the very least. And the Atlantic Division, and especially the Eastern Conference, is just a lot tougher. Montreal will be among the worst teams in the National Hockey League, in my opinion. Moving on here in 7th in the Atlantic Division, I got the Buffalo Sabres with a 33-41-8 record for a total of 74 points. Now, for me personally, I really do like where the Buffalo Sabres are heading entering this season. They honestly started a lot better than I thought they would last year, and then they finished the season red hot. So maybe they can carry that momentum into this season, another year of development with their core that they're slowly starting to form, and I think is coming together. But obviously, it's still a pretty young team. They're in a very tough division. I still think there are some holes that they got to fill. I don't think they're the deepest of offensive teams. I think their blue line is still very young and inexperienced, needs to get better. The goaltending, we don't know exactly what that's going to look like. Is Eric Comrie ready to be a starting goalie? I know he had a very good season as the backup in Winnipeg, but right now, they don't really have a starting caliber goaltender. Maybe Eric Comrie can be that guy. We'll see with him, but obviously he has yet to prove that. So overall, still a lot of holes with this Sabres team. But I still think they're going to be relatively competitive and finish around the same as they did last season. But again, I think the Atlantic Division got a lot tougher. So that's a reason why Buffalo could maybe only be 7th in this division with the turnover in the Eastern Conference, right? But getting into who I have as the top 5 scorers for the Buffalo Sabres, leading the way, I got Alex Tuch. He was low-key kind of breaking out ever since he was acquired from the Vegas Golden Knights to Buffalo. And he was a little bit injured there, but he was fairly productive. And I think a full season in Buffalo, I think he's the future captain of this team. He's a great leader, and I think he's going to have a breakout offensive season. Probably push for about 70 points. I think he's capable of hovering close to 30 goals and 70 points, like I said. I just think this guy, has more to give. He was obviously sheltered a little bit in Vegas, playing mainly in a third line role. And I think obviously on that top line, he had some chemistry with guys like Tage Thompson and Jeff Skinner. And I think that top line is probably going to stay together. I would definitely try to keep that top line together. I just think he's going to have a great offensive year and lead the way for the Sabres. Second, I got Tage Thompson. Obviously, he is officially their number 1 center. Had an amazing breakout season, came out of absolutely nowhere. I believe he had 37 goals and 67 points, if I'm not mistaken. So I, have him taking maybe a little bit of a step back, but obviously kind of like Troy Terry in Anaheim. It was a season that was just a total breakout year, came absolutely out of nowhere, and he needs kind of to have another season like that to sort of prove to me that he is that type of player. He is a top line contributor or a legit number 1 center. But obviously, I still think he can be roughly a 30-goal, 60-point player. So I guess, It's not really a huge slight on his production or anything like that, but anyway, yeah, Tage Thompson's still going to produce, obviously, on the top line. Jeff Skinner, third on the team in scoring, in my opinion, should hover around 55 points, 30 goals as well. Had an amazing bounce back season, and if he, stays on that line and they can sustain chemistry, he should be just fine in terms of his scoring. Rasmus Dahlin, their leading blue liner in terms of offensive production, should be a 50 to 55 point guy. No surprise there. I think he has a lot of potential to be a top D-man in this league. Obviously, offensively, he's already pretty elite in my opinion. Overall, I think his game needs to come around a little bit, but still, I think he's going to produce. And then a Victor Olofsson, roughly 50 points as well. Just a very solid complimentary guy. He's a threat on the power play as well. Just a good depth scorer, top 6 caliber player. You could throw anybody. I could see a guy like Peyton Krebs taking another step forward, and maybe Dylan Cousins in his third season kind of breaking out. There's a lot of options for this Sabres team. So I think they're a much better offensive team, and they're going to be a lot deeper overall. But in the grand scheme of things, when I look at this young core, I just don't quite put them on the same level as the likes of, the Detroit Red Wings and the Ottawa Senators, two teams that unquestionably proved much more than the Buffalo Sabres did. Those teams I have having significant breakout seasons and being a lot better. Buffalo, I just don't quite see it. I don't quite put them in that tier, but I definitely think there is potential for them to be a lot better. We just have to see. I just need them to prove it kind of, but they're definitely moving in the right direction. And I'm very excited to see where the Buffalo Sabres are heading. All right, coming in at number 6 here, maybe a bit of a hot take, probably the biggest hot take of this video. I got the Boston Bruins with a 39, 36, and 7 record for a total of 85 points, and obviously I do not have them making the playoffs this year. Now, I think you could even argue that the Boston Bruins did get slightly better this offseason, and, they've been one of the more consistent teams over the last, decade plus. And obviously, I think they still have a lot of elite pieces, and they tend to be one of the more underrated elite teams, I guess you could say, in the Eastern Conference. But I just have concerns about the key injuries. A lot of guys there that are really, big parts of that team are going to miss a lot of time. And I honestly could see that being costly when it comes down to the wire there, down the stretch in the playoff race, that they could be a team that falls short. I just think when you potentially are losing a guy like Matt Grzelcyk, who's a very steady top 4 defenseman for maybe the first month of the season, and then Brad Marchand, who is their main offensive driver. He is basically the Boston Bruins. He really is, the straw that stirs the drink kind of in that Boston Bruins team. If you're a Bruins fan, you know this for a fact. It's just the Bruins tend to struggle a bit without Brad Marchand in the lineup. And although they do have some good pieces that could still kind of replace it, not fully sold on the depth they have right now. They've always been a team that struggled to get that consistent secondary scoring. So I could see that being a huge issue to start the season, especially without Brad Marchand, who could be out for maybe the first 2 months of the season, it looks like, as well as Charlie McAvoy, who is their number 1 defenseman, their best offensive guy and probably a top 5 defenseman in the league, one of the best defensive guys as well. I just think, with the injuries they have, I could see this team falling behind quite quickly to start the year. And like I said, I just think it can be costly. I don't think their secondary scoring, their depth is quite good enough to keep them afloat. And I don't think, although their goaltending, I think it's good. I don't think it's at the elite level that it could potentially carry them and keep them afloat as well. There's just a lot of, reasons for me to get concerned as to why the Bruins are probably not going to be as elite as they once were. And also, this is just a much older core. Leading the Bruins in scoring, I do have David Pastrnak with 46 goals, 40 assists for 86 points. He is roughly a point per game player. Obviously, maybe not having Brad Marchand to complement him, feed him the pucks and all that to start the season, he could struggle a bit. But honestly, he did form some chemistry with Taylor Hall on that second line. And of course, when you bring back David Krejci, I could see him still, finding ways to be an elite goal scorer. I mean, I think he could do just fine. So obviously him leading the team in scoring is not really a hot take. Brad Marchand, with roughly 60 games, if he misses the time we expect him to, I think he will be an above a point per game guy. Should be roughly 70 points in over that 60 game span, kind of. Obviously one of the more elite wingers in the league, very underrated as well. Third, I got Taylor Hall with about 66 points, so in the 65 to 70 point range. He's a very good playmaker. He likes to drive the play off the rush in that wing spot. 20 goal scorer roughly. Just a very good complimentary piece, very good. He's found his role basically in Boston on that second line. Obviously, him and Pastrnak had chemistry, like I mentioned before, so he should be a premier offensive guy on that team. Patrice Bergeron, I have with 60 points. I do have him taking a slight step back. Obviously, he is getting a little bit older. He's only there for one more season. Well, he signed a one-year deal. Who knows if it's going to be his last season or if he continues on the rest of his career at Boston and signs, longer-term extension. But at his age, we don't know. But yes, I do have him taking a slight step back offensively. I'm just not sure if he is the same elite offensive centerman he once was, especially if, a guy like Brad Marchand's not going to be out for a while. He definitely does drive that line, in my opinion, and Patrice Bergeron definitely benefits playing with elite players like that. So I could see his offense kind of take a little bit of a dip. And then, of course, in fifth, I do have David Krejci coming back from the Czech league, I would say. This guy is just a very solid two-way center, very responsible two-way center. So roughly should hover around 50 points. He was playing very well even before he left the Czech league. So coming back, I think he should fit in right back into that Bruins team like a glove. I don't see any reason why he would not produce at a very solid rate. So overall, I do kind of like a bit of what Boston is as a team, as a whole. I do think there is a chance that they could prove me wrong here, but I guess I'm just betting on the core. Just getting a little bit older. I do think the key injuries are going to be costly, like I said. And, eventually, you can't just hold on to this window of being a contender for much longer. Boston's just been a good team for way too long. And if there's any year that you could bet on this type of team missing the playoffs, I think it's this upcoming season. Just with the improvement in the Eastern Conference, like I just keep mentioning, it's getting a lot deeper. It's getting a lot better, in my opinion. It's not going to be the same lopsided Eastern Conference it was, especially last season. And Boston's just a team that I could just really see taking a step back and ultimately missing the playoffs. Fifth in the Atlantic, I got the Detroit Red Wings with a 38, 33, and 11 record for a total of 87 points. Not quite making the playoffs, but I do have them taking quite a leap forward. Obviously, the offseason would indicate that the Detroit Red Wings are probably one of the more improved teams in the NHL entering this season. Although I do expect a lot of their younger players to take another step forward, and this team as a whole is going to be a lot better than where they were last year and be more competitive and definitely push for a playoff spot. I still think there are some holes in the lineup, just enough for me to kind of be a little bit more hesitant about me actually going the extra mile and putting them in a playoff spot, though. I think the one positive about this team is they definitely got a lot deeper. You add Ville Husso to the fray. I think their goaltending is going to be a lot better. You rock him and Alex Nedeljkovic as more of a tandem. I think that is going to work pretty well. Apart from that, Andrew Kopp, David Perron is definitely going to help their offensive depth. But, Andrew Kopp is coming off a very good season. He was playing really well in New York. I'm not exactly sure if he is a type of guy who can be like a consistent top six forward. Like I know he's coming off roughly a 50-point season if memory serves correctly, but he's never really been that elite offensive player. I'm not really sure if he is like a legit number 2 center in the NHL, but he can still probably be just very solid depth. And obviously that center depth is definitely going to be improved with him now joining the Red Wings. David Perron's another guy who had a pretty good season when healthy, but he is also like on the wrong side of 30. I believe he's in his mid-30s now, like 34, 35 years old. I could see his offense kind of take a dip. And, I don't necessarily consider this offense to be elite, although I think they're a lot deeper. I would definitely kind of characterize this Red Wings offense as more so middle of the pack in terms of where they rank in the NHL. In terms of the additions they made on the blue line, I do kind of like the Olli Maatta signing. The Ben Sherratt one, obviously, he got pretty overpaid, but I definitely think he can be somewhat of a stabilizer in terms of his physicality on that top four. But I do think the moves defensively were kind of overrated. I don't necessarily think their defense is all that much improved. I think Olli Maatta might be a very good addition because I think he's a very solid defensive defenseman. And, a guy like Mo Seider maybe taking another step forward could definitely help that defense as a whole, but I still don't see it being quite, on the same level as like, a true contending defense team, right? Obviously. So, there's still a lot of really good pieces on this team. And like I said, they're going to take steps forward, but I'm not quite sure on them being a playoff team just yet. I think we could be getting a little bit ahead of ourselves there. But getting into who I have as the top 5 scorers on the Red Wings. First, I got Dylan Larkin hovering around a point per game, about 35 goals. He had a great season last year. Obviously, he had a couple of years where he was very underwhelming, very disappointing, but he had a very good season last year. Best season of his career, unquestionably, and I think he can have, a similar year to that. He's just a very good number one centerman, and maybe takes another step forward and becomes an elite, like 85, 90 point player. We'll see though. Tyler Bertuzzi, if he's fully healthy, he should be over 70 points, push for 40 goals, honestly. He is a perennial 30 goal scorer when fully healthy, so I do definitely think 37 goals, roughly 75 points, actually doesn't really seem like that big of a hot take at all. Next, I got Lucas Raymond with 68 points, 25 goals, 43 assists. Should hover around 70 points, takes another step forward in his development in his sophomore season. Not really that big of a hot take either. Maybe he can have more points, like I said, kind of like with Dylan Larkin. But yeah, he's definitely a very solid player, definitely one of the better playmakers on this team. And then I got Jacob Vrana again. He needs to be fully healthy for this to happen, but definitely think he can be a 60-point guy. I think he has the potential to be a 30-plus goal scorer on this team, and obviously the offensive depth is going to continue to get better, and a guy like Jacob Vrana, if he stays healthy, is going to be a main reason why that offense will be a lot better. And then fifth, I got Moritz Seider, pushing for about 60 points. He's already an elite defenseman in this league. I think as soon as next season, we can consider him at the very least a top 10 defenseman in the NHL. I really think he has the potential to be a Norris caliber defenseman, obviously, but already he's shown signs in his rookie season that he is going to be an absolute stud on that blue line for years to come on this Red Wings team. But overall, I really like what the Red Wings are building, and they are going to be a contender in the near future. But as of right now, I'm still a little bit on the fence as them being a playoff team. But I will say this, I think this is the last season where we see the Detroit Red Wings miss the playoffs. And after that, they're going to be a consistent playoff team and eventually build themselves to being a contender. Maybe there's a dynasty potential there. We'll see, because the Red Wings have a very, very bright future. But for right now, I'm holding out on them being a playoff team right now. Now, next up here, fourth in the Atlantic Division. Maybe this is somewhat of a hot take, although I do still have the Tampa Bay Lightning making the playoffs with a 46-30-6 record for 98 points. I do only have them as the first wild card in the Atlantic or in the Eastern Conference. So I do not have them top three in the Atlantic, and I'll explain. On paper, when you look at this Lightning team, I think unquestionably they probably should be like the favorite to win the Atlantic Division. I think on paper they are the best team in this division, but I do have some concerns entering this season. They've been on 3 straight Stanley Cup runs. They won 2 Stanley Cups and they made the finals last season. I just think, with all the extra games they played, basically played an entire additional calendar NHL regular season over those last 3 playoff runs, I do think the fatigue could start to set in here. They are more of a veteran team. I do think injuries, because they were quite banged up in that Stanley Cup final. Not to say that Colorado didn't deserve to win, but anyway, I do think, a shorter offseason for them, they could still be lingering injuries there around the roster, and I do think it could slow them down a little bit, and not to say that they're not going to be an elite team, but I could legitimately see them struggling a little bit to make the playoffs, but ultimately I still have them getting in. Combine that with the fact that I think the Tampa Bay Lightning unquestionably got significantly weaker this offseason, replacing Ryan McDonough, having to shed his contract for Philip Myers, definitely a downgrade on the blue line. I think Ian Cole personally is a downgrade over Jan Rutta. Ian Cole is a lot older, is more of a veteran defenseman. Nemestikov, he used to play for Tampa. He had some chemistry there with Stamkos and Kucherov, I remember at one point on that top line. But yeah, definitely he's not going to be replacing Andre Palat. I just thought Palat was the perfect complementary piece for that team, and I really am disappointed to see him leaving Tampa, because I really thought he was a perfect player there, or perfect fit, I should say, excuse me. But yeah, definitely this team got a lot weaker, and although overall the team is still pretty elite up front and on the blue line, they're still very solid, and obviously Andre Vasilevsky is the best goaltender in the league. Like I mentioned before, all the reasons I said, I could see this team taking a step back in the regular season, and even the last couple of years, they've been known to kind of sort of coast a little bit more in the regular season, and this could be definitely another one of those years. So top 5 scorers for the Tampa Bay Lightning. First is Nikita Kucherov. If he's fully healthy, he should be roughly a 100-point player. Even last season in the limited games, I think he was playing at a 120-point pace. He could pop off. That wouldn't really surprise me that much. But obviously, I guess I just, with sort of a slight step back with the whole Tampa Bay Lightning team as a whole, I guess maybe that's a big reason why I wouldn't have Kucherov maybe necessarily popping off to that degree, but still should hover around 100 points. I think that's, very reasonable, very fair to think about, right? Steven Stamkos, second. He had a career season over 100 points. I don't think he's going to replicate that personally, but I still think he's probably roughly a 40-goal scorer, 90-point guy. Victor Hedman, roughly around a point per game defenseman. He had a very amazing season last year offensively, and I see no reason why he wouldn't repeat that. Obviously, leading that blue line quarterback in that top power play unit, he is their main force on the offensive end in terms of the blue line production there. Braden Point should be fourth, in my opinion. 35 goals, 72 points. I don't necessarily think he is like the elite offensive player that people claim, but I still think he is a guy who is capable of producing, pretty solidly in the regular season. Obviously, he steps his game up in the playoffs when he's fully healthy, but definitely I don't envision him being a 90-plus point player. I never really considered him that. He did have one really good season, but apart from that, he's never really been a perennial like point per game or above a point per game player. So honestly, that's not really a huge hot take to say that he doesn't quite finish at a point per game level. And then fifth, I mean, the depth kind of dries out a little bit after that. I went with Alex Killorn since he is coming off a pretty good season, so I can see him hovering around 50 points. There's nothing really else for me to explain there. So overall, I still think Tampa is a very good team, at least on paper. And if they make the playoffs, they definitely are still a big threat and still a Stanley Cup contender with the roster they have as a whole. But, the losses they had on depth in terms of their offseason, the type of players that they lost. And I just think, again, the fatigue, the injuries, I think it could set in this season. I think they're going to struggle a little bit to make the playoffs. But, again, still have them getting in just only as a wild card, though. That's a bit of a hot take. I know the Atlantic is kind of experiencing some turnover, but you know what? I'm going to say that they make only a wild card spot, but they could obviously finish a lot higher. And they'll totally, blow this prediction out of the water and totally exceed my expectations. But anyway, Tampa's still going to be a very good team, don't get me wrong. Next up, third in the Atlantic Division, I got the Ottawa Senators having a massive breakout season and getting into the playoffs with a 45, 28, and 9 record for 99 points and cracking a top 3 spot in the Atlantic Division. So if you guys did not see my bold predictions video, if you haven't, go check that out. I was kind of torn between the Ottawa Senators and Detroit Red Wings, who I would put as the 3 seed in the Atlantic Division. But ultimately, I went with the Ottawa Senators. I think they had a little bit of bad luck in terms of injuries. And even though, even if fully healthy last year, I didn't think they were going to make the playoffs anyway. I do believe the additions they made this season, fully healthy, I believe they are ready to take that next step and be a playoff team. In my opinion, they are the most improved team in the NHL entering this season. The only main concern I have with Ottawa is their blue line. They didn't really improve it that much. Aside from Thomas Chabot, who's more so of an offensive guy, the rest of the blue line I'm not entirely sold on at this point. They're rumored to be maybe in on Jacob Chikrin. We'll see what type of players they'd have to give up for him. I think if they do acquire him, they're going to be in much better shape, obviously, on the blue line. But in goal, I think they definitely got a lot better. You add Cam Talbot, get rid of Philip Gustafsson, who's coming off a rough season. Talbot wasn't necessarily the most consistent of goalies, but definitely a huge upgrade there. And, riding in tandem with him as well as Anton Forsberg, who's coming off a great season, I think they can get by with that goaltending tandem. And especially on the offensive end, they made some massive improvements, adding Alex DeBrincat and Claude Giroux. That top 6 is going to be absolutely nasty, and I could see them legitimately being at the very least a top 10 offensive team, and you can make the argument this is a top 5 offensive team in the National Hockey League entering this season. So leading the Sens in scoring, I actually have their new acquisition in Alex DeBrincat. I honestly think he's capable of producing north of 50 goals and north of 90 points. The one concern I have with him is who is he going to find that chemistry with, because obviously in Chicago he had an amazing chemistry with an elite playmaker like Patrick Kane. But the Senators have a plethora of great playmakers themselves. Guys like Drake Batherson and Tim Stützle. Tim Stützle is a guy who could potentially play on his line, so he could be someone I could see feeding him the puck a lot, as well as Claude Giroux, who was over an assist per game in his tenure with Florida, even though it was a pretty small sample size, but at the same token, still a very solid playmaker. So I think Alex DeBrincat is going to have a lot of options of guys who are going to feed him the puck. And I do think in the Senator system, he's going to find a way to absolutely obliterate the net. And second, I got Drake Batherson with about a point per game pace there, knocking on the door of 30 goals and having over 50 assists. He was near a point per game last season. I think he was playing at an amazing rate to start the year. And then obviously the injury definitely hurt his breakout season. He was going to have an amazing breakout season, but obviously got hurt. And then when he came back, he was still pretty good, but obviously he fell under a point per game. I do think, fully healthy Drake Batherson should be roughly a point per game player. I see no reason why he shouldn't kind of replicate the season he had last year in terms of his points per game and be a little bit better, just because he is still very young and he's only getting better. He's going to continue to develop. The offense around him is just really good, so I would expect him to have a great season. Brady Tkachuk, I have third on the team, over 30 goals, over 70 points. That's not really a hot take. I think that's just what he is. He's just one of the better power forwards in the game, maybe the best power forward in the game right now. Perennial 30-goal scorer, the captain of this team. He should have a very solid offensive season. I could see him having even more points just with the improved and offensive depth around him now. Tim Stützle is going to have a breakout year, in my opinion, if he's playing with goal scorers like Alex DeBrincat and obviously maybe Claude Giroux to complete that second line. Should be a guy to hover over 70 points, be roughly a 25-goal scorer and maybe close to 50 assists. I could definitely see that being a possibility. Tim Stützle, former third overall pick. I just think he is going to be an elite player in this league, and he maybe could even lead the team in scoring. I definitely think he has that offensive upside. And then, of course, in fifth, I got Josh Norris hovering around 40 goals. He was amazing last year. I believe he had 55 points in 66 games. More of a power play specialist. I think he was a very, very efficient power play scorer. I definitely think his 5-on-5 game needs to be a little bit better, and his defensive game I think needs to come around. But as a number one center, I definitely still think he is going to produce quite some good numbers. He needs to prove to me that he can be, on 40-goal pace again. But we'll see. I still think he has the plethora, the tools, and the skill set to be a very solid goal scoring center in the NHL. This may be a hot take, picking a team like the Senators over the likes of the Tampa Bay Lightning. Well, I still have Tampa making the playoffs, but having them finish ahead of them, and them making the playoffs over the likes of the Detroit Red Wings and the Boston Bruins. But you know what? Say what you want. Maybe the hype on this team is a little bit premature, but I am fully convinced that this team is ready to take that next step and get into the playoffs. I think their elite offense alone, potentially their elite offense alone, will carry them into the playoffs, and I do think their goaltending is good enough to get them there. Second in the Atlantic Division, I got the Florida Panthers with a 48-25-9 record for a total of 105 points. Obviously, they got significantly weaker this offseason, and I definitely think with the losses they had, they are not going to be in contention for that President's Trophy. However, I don't think I would go as far as to say that they're not going to be a playoff team. I think people who are saying they're not going to be a playoff team, with all due respect, I think you're high. This team is still very good in my mind. Obviously, they had a historically great offensive season. I don't think they're going to repeat that, but they still have overall a very solid team. So there definitely should still be in contention for a top spot in the Atlantic Division, and they'll definitely be a top 3 team in the division at the very least. I just don't see how a team of this caliber can go from a President's Trophy winning team to not making the playoffs. I know they did trade away Jonathan Huberdeau and Mackenzie Weegar. Obviously, their defense is a huge question mark now without Weegar. And obviously, you trade for Matthew Tkachuk, who probably isn't going to replace quite what Huberdeau was offensively, especially in his playmaking. But I definitely think Matthew Tkachuk is definitely a more responsible two-way player. And he's arguably, obviously, I don't even think arguable. He is the better goal scorer. He is a better, net front presence. He's more physical. I definitely think overall, I think they got a maybe potentially a more complete player, just not quite the elite offensive player. But at the same time, I still think the Florida offense as a whole is still deep on its own. So even if after you lose Huberdeau, you still have Alexander Barkov, who is an elite, number one center in the league, probably a top 5 number one center. Sam Reinhart, Carter Verhaeghe. I know Anthony Duclair is injured, but they still have some pretty decent depth pieces. I still think that the Florida Panthers are going to be a good team, and especially their goaltending, even though Bobrovsky obviously still has some inconsistency issues. He was coming off a pretty good season, but the big key piece here, the big X factor, I think Spencer Knight's going to low-key break out, and I think he's going to fill that void and be the legitimate number one goaltender on this team. I think he's going to have a great career, and I think he's going to have a very good season. And that's a big reason why I think Florida Panthers, even though they won't be as dominant as they were last season, I still think they should be a playoff team in the Atlantic Division. Leading the Panthers in scoring, obviously it's got to be Alexander Barkov. I have him hovering around 40 goals and over 90 points. Obviously an elite two-way player, one of the better defensive players in the league, and he is an elite offensive player as well. His points per game was pretty high. He did have a little bit of injury issues, but I still think he should be well over a point per game. I just don't know if anyone on the Panthers are going to quite have the same elite season that they did last season. But for Barkov, he should still obviously lead the team in scoring. Second, I got Matthew Tkachuk hovering around a point per game. I do not personally think he is a perennial 100-point player. I just don't think he's going to quite replicate the season he had last season in Calgary. But I still think he should hover around a point per game on this Panthers team. Playing with an elite center like Alexander Barkov, he should be a guy to score over 30 goals and roughly 80, 85 points. Well, I have him 79, but anyway, like roughly a point per game, I guess I should have said. But yeah, still going to be a very solid offensive producer. There's no question about that. Sam Reinhart, again, should be hovering around a point per game. He had an amazing season last year, and he was very underrated with Buffalo, and I still think he is capable of being that offensive threat, even though there's a lot of guys on that team who had career years. I don't think Sam Reinhart necessarily did. I think that is the player he is. In the right system, I do think he can be a perennial 70-point guy. Aaron Ekblad, I got fourth. I think his points per game, he was near a point per game as a defenseman. I don't think he's going to be quite at that, but I still think he should be roughly a 20-goal scorer and hover around 70 points. I still think he has the elite offensive upside, even though some people kind of question his two-way game, but I still think he's one of the better defensemen in the NHL. And then fifth, I kind of just threw out Carter Verhaeghe. He should hover around 60 points, hover around 30 goals as well. Stepped up in the playoffs. Very solid complementary piece. No matter who he plays with, I think he should be a very solid offensive producer. Say what you want about this Panthers team, that they got a lot weaker. I think they were already a very good team. A lot of the players that they lost in the offseason were guys they acquired at the deadline, like Giroux and Ben Sherratt. So you know what? I still think they'll do just fine. Even, losing Huberdeau and Uyghur definitely hurts, especially on defense. I still think you add Matthew Tkachuk, they're still a top 10 offensive team in the NHL, in my opinion. And I still think their goaltending is very good, especially if Spencer Knight, like I'm predicting, to take a massive step forward if he can develop and be a number one goalie. This Panthers team should still be among the better teams in the NHL. Probably not in contention for the President's Trophy, but I think it's safe to say that this still should be a playoff team, right? I guess I could see the argument and why they would take a massive step back, but in terms of them missing the playoffs, I really don't see it, honestly. To end things off, winning the Atlantic Division, I got the Toronto Maple Leafs with a 59-18-5 record for a total of 123 points. And maybe a hot take, maybe not, but I actually have them winning the President's Trophy. Now, one can argue that this team improved. Others can argue that maybe they got worse. But I still think this team overall is very elite, especially offensively. I think those guys are going to absolutely carry this team to a lot of wins, much like they did last season. The goaltending tandem, maybe you would say it's a downgrade, but I honestly don't mind the Matt Murray acquisition. I think he honestly played a lot better than people thought he did. His save percentage was over 900. His goals saved above expected was in the positives. Ilya Samsonov, I think, still has the potential to be a very solid goaltender. So I think their tandem, honestly, isn't that bad. Maybe it's not like up to par to the elite status, but I definitely still think, at the very least, I think it's average. And I think, with the Toronto Maple Leafs, who had terrible goaltending last season, if they get average goaltending, they probably should be a President's Trophy winning team, if we're being totally honest. And combine that with the fact that their defense is very solid, and it's not the same sorry defense it was in the past couple of seasons, or even, the year before was really good, but last year was very solid. And I just think they have the makeup to be a very solid defensive team. So offense is great, defense is great. I just think this is an elite team. And I just think also on the mental side of things, the playoff failures that they've had over the past few years, I think it should just motivate them to go off, just go all in on the regular season, get a top seed, give yourself the best chance to advance in the Stanley Cup playoffs and get all that pressure off their shoulders. If they are a President's Trophy winning team, they'll be facing a second wild card. So it gives them the best advantage, and no one has to complain about, we faced a tough matchup in like the Tampa Bay Lightning or whatever. You face a wild card team, it's more likely going to be a weaker team in the East that just sneaks into the playoffs. That should be a huge opportunity for the Leafs to actually do some damage in the playoffs. So I think going hard in the regular season might be the best path for this Maple Leafs team to actually find some playoff success. But not only that, obviously, I think this team is elite enough, and I think they have full capabilities of actually winning a President's Trophy. So let me just clarify that. Top 5 on the team in scoring, it's the same 5 names, that big 5. Austin Matthews probably should lead the team in scoring, should hover around 60 goals, the best goal scorer in the NHL, over 100 points. Mitch Marner, fully healthy, I believe is a 100-point player. I think he should be roughly a 30-goal guy and 70 assists. He could be even closer to an assist per game. It wouldn't really surprise me that much. He's just one of the more elite offensive guys and very underrated defensively as well. William Nylander, I think, is capable of being over a point per game player. I think he was hovering around that last year. If not, he was over. I'm not really sure. I don't have the numbers in front of me. But yes, should be roughly an 80 to 85 point guy, over 30 goals. And then fourth, I have John Tavares with 72 points, roughly 30 goals. I do think he has lost the foot speed a little bit, and maybe his offense, I don't think it's going to be over a point per game. It hasn't been the last couple of seasons, and I do think he could start to take slight steps back, but very gradual. It's not going to be anything huge. He's still going to put up some very good offensive numbers, don't get me wrong, but I definitely don't think he's going to be quite in that 80, 85 point range anymore. I just think he is losing a bit of a step, so I could see him taking a slight step back offensively. And then in fifth, I got Morgan Rielly. Had a great offensive year last year. I could see him hovering around 60 points once again. And obviously, these are the top 5 in scoring. These are the 5 guys for the Leafs. I don't think anyone else should even be touching these 5 guys in terms of point totals. But we'll see. Maybe there's other guys who have a better chemistry and kind of pop off. But honestly, I think these should be the consensus 5 names you should see in the top 5 scoring for the Toronto Maple Leafs next season. But overall, this Toronto Maple Leafs team is too good not to be one of the best teams in the NHL. Elite offense, elite blue line, and the goaltending I think should improve, especially with a good blue line in front of it. The Toronto Maple Leafs are pretty easy pick not only to win the Atlantic Division, but I definitely think they have President's Trophy aspirations. And again, we'll see what they do in the playoffs, but this is going to be a very, very, very good team next season, without question. So that is going to wrap up my Atlantic Division standings prediction for this upcoming season in the NHL. Let me know your thoughts, as always, if you agree with these picks or if you disagree with these picks. And once again, thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I will talk to you in the next one. I'll see you guys later.